Inspired by a passage in Moby Dick, I set out to explore the profound and unbounded sea. I went whale watching in Plymouth, not too far from here. And while I was waiting for my boat to go out to sea, I walked into a tea shop, and I drank a cup of white tea, not knowing much about tea at the time. But at that point, I realized that I had never truly had good tea. And I decided I would cultivate this as my hobby, as my reaction to the wine community. So I started spending my weekends in Chinatown, drinking tea, and reading more about this drink that was going to become such an integral part of my life. My career took me to Cambodia, and while I was there, I stumbled into Cambodia's first Chinese tea shop. I talked to the tea shop owner. He didn't speak much English, and I didn't speak much Khmer. But after several rounds of tea, we became good friends. And I started spending every single weekend in that tea shop, drinking tea and starting to feel more at peace with myself. I was noticing that a lot of the problems that plagued my early 20s, bouts of depression and anxiety, were dissipating. And I wondered how much of this had to do with tea. And I had to figure this out. So I deferred grad school for a year and went to the source. I showed up in China, in the city of Kunming. On my first night there, I walked into a bar. I didn't speak a word of Chinese at the time. And if you haven't been to China, English isn't going to get you very far in rural provinces. So I asked the bartender to translate this note for me. Basically what it says is, I've come from America to study tea. Can you teach me and give me some tea so I can start a tea business after I graduate? I walked to the train station, and I showed the note to the person selling tickets. She understood. She gave me a ticket. I looked at it. It was in Chinese. I had no idea what it meant. But I got on the train, and 9 hours later, I was at my destination. It was the morning, so I walked into a noodle shop, ate some noodles, showed it to the waitress. She understood. She pointed, and I walked to a local bus station. I got on a bus, showed it to the bus driver. He got it. 8 stops later, he told me to get off at the market. I talked to a lady selling apples, showed her the note. She told me, just wait, 15 minutes. And I waited. A truck came by, showed it to the truck driver. He told me to get in the back. And an hour later, I was on a farm, drinking teas that I had never had before. And this was my second day in China. And this story repeated itself over and over again. 4,000 miles from Burma to Beijing. But it wasn't all fun and games. On one night at Laojian'ai, the Golden Triangle's largest club, I seriously offended this man's ex-girlfriend due to an error in Google Translate. But the club closed, and I had nowhere to go. And after 6 bottles of Bud Ice, I got on the back of his motorcycle without a helmet. I used to work for Handicap International, and I realized this was really stupid, but I had nowhere to go. So I took a 30-minute ride, meandering through unlit roads, wondering, was this ride going to end in a ditch? But no, it didn't. He had a kind heart inside, and it ended back in his house, neighboring a pristine tea farm. This kindness replicated itself over and over again in China. In Anji, high school students missed their bus to take me to my train station so I would have somewhere to go. And I filled my backpack, bursting with the best teas that I could find. I brought them back here, and I wanted to see what was so special about tea culture that was changing my life. So I put my old chemistry degree, and I went into lab. And this is what I found. All of these teas had a ton of this compound, theanine. Now, theanine's amazing. It's been shown to improve concentration, improve memory, and release dopamine, actually making you happier. And these teas had tons of theanine. And that synergistic relationship of theanine and caffeine working on your brain is what was produced the singular tea buzz that I felt of being both alert and relaxed. And unsurprisingly, Lipton had none. And at this point, I felt that I was onto something. There was a problem to solve here, and this was going to be a pursuit. But I knew my note couldn't take me much further. So I started learning Chinese. And I started spending all my nights and weekends puttering around the East Asian Language Library, reading these ancient Chinese texts, and I saw that so many people before me had experienced these brilliant effects of tea and how it changed their lives in ways that it changed mine. This was moving from a hobby to a rabid obsession. All I was doing was studying Chinese, drinking tea, and learning about tea. MIT threatened to kick me out of school because I was skipping all of my required classes to attend Mandarin classes, which I felt were needed, because this was going to be my life's work. 2 years later, I bought a plane ticket and went back to China with conversational Chinese and a new Chinese name, Long An, or Peaceful Dragon, under my belt. I showed up in Kunming, the same city that I started my journey, this time without a note, but with a mountain bike. And I rode around, farm to farm, showing up at farmers' doorsteps, asking to drink their teas, and trying to figure out how can we bring these teas back to America. And while I was there, the story got even deeper. These famous teas that I found on my first trip were called the 10 Teas of China. Over the last 1,000 years, teas became really famous in Chinese history because emperors endorsed them. And with the celebrity endorsement like an emperor, these teas grew to such levels of fame. Chinese businessmen and government officials often gift these teas to each other, and these great teas often go stale, dressed in ornate packaging. But in my travels in Yunnan, I started to find splendid teas that had in some cases more theanine than the famous teas of China. But because they lacked brand recognition, these farmers remained in poverty. And this was a problem that I was going to solve. So I started working with 5 communities, buying their teas and trying to build my supply chain. Now, 2 years of Mandarin, even with the best Chinese teachers that I had, will prepare you to order food, go to the bar, and have conversations. It's not supposed to prepare you to build an entire supply chain from scratch. And it's not supposed to prepare you to negotiate with the Chinese government on pesticide requirements. But I was there and I had to do it. So I bought 200 pounds of tea. And then about 2.5 months into my trip, I started to get some strange feelings. I was sitting in a village by myself, like I often spent my days. And I started to think about a passage in Moby Dick. Not the one that I typically broach in dinner conversation, about exploring the profound and unbounded sea, but one that I keep myself and often haunts me. The one moment in the novel when Captain Ahab reflects on what this journey is taking its toll on his life. The 30 years at sea, the son he's never seen, and the wife who's effectively been a widow, and that desolation of solitude that has plagued him. And I started to think about my life, the life that I adore. I was doing what I love, and I was enjoying all of this celebrity of building something beautiful for the world from nothing. The invitations to present my research at Harvard Med. The invitations to speak at events like this. But at what cost? I wasn't socializing, I hadn't spoken to my family in months, and I couldn't hold down a relationship at all. And I started to cry. Is this the life that I wanted for me? And I went to bed. I woke up the next morning, still confused, and I started to look in this broken mirror in my hotel room. And on the left side of my brain, I had Starbucks telling me, give up. Go back to America, go back to your job, and buy a house. Just be a grown-up. And on the right, I had Captain Ahab telling me, don't ever give up on what you care about in life. And I had to come clean with myself. And I thought, I'll be damned if I have to spend the rest of my life asking, what if? So I built my supply chain and I kept negotiating with the government. Bought 200 pounds of tea, and it went from these farms in a van to Kunming, on a freight train to Shenzhen, and then on a barge to America. I came within a few hours of being fined $20,000 by FDA, which would have bankrupted me. My tea was seized by customs in New York, where they threatened to incinerate it, and I didn't sleep for a week. But the tea eventually made it to Cambridge. And I started hosting tea tastings at my house, my own Boston tea parties, as avenues to allow people of different backgrounds to come together on the weekends to have real and ongoing, meaningful intellectual exchange. I didn't realize it at the time, but these tea tastings would become the core of my business. As we become increasingly digitized, as it becomes so easy to find someone else on your smartphone, I worried that real and meaningful conversation was increasingly becoming lost. In the same way that these teas from marginalized communities where farmers are often leaving their farms to go to the cities to work grueling migrant labor jobs, their tea would also be lost. I founded Lost Tea because I thought I could save these things. And I hope my story inspires you to find your white whale. So when you look back on your life, you may not have to ask yourself, what if?